Okay, so should we go ahead and get started? I know people are still logging on. I know we're all eager to hear what you have to say, Darby. So are you all ready?
I'm ready.
Awesome. So I'm just going to give a brief introduction because we want to get to all of your wonderful, hear all of your wonderful insights. My name is Melissa Otero. I'm a school psychologist here at Sacred Heart, and I work primarily in the lower school and middle school.
And good evening, everybody. I'm Lisa Schwartz. I am the psychologist in the upper school, and we're so happy to have you here tonight. We were fortunate to have Darby join us today. She spoke to all the girls, the middle school and the upper school, and it was very well received, and they had some wonderful questions. So she's here to join us tonight on a conversation on social media and relationships in the internet age. We're very much looking forward to hearing what she has to say. To give you a little bit of a background, Darby Fox is a child and adolescent family therapist with over 20 years of experience. Darby has deep empathy for children and families from diverse cultural and economic backgrounds and is an expert on parenting, child psychology, and family topics. She appears regularly on air and in print media, covering a range of topics from parenting questions and discipline techniques to current trends in child development. She recently collaborated with Meath Media Group to develop a television series called Fractured Family with Darby Fox. This year, Darby led a panel discussion on bullying for the UVA Curry School of Education. She also serves as a pro bono mental health consultant to the American Red Cross Board of Directors. Darby's first book, Rethinking Your Teenager, Shifting from Conflict and Control to Structure and Nurture to Raise Accountable Young Adults, was published last year by Oxford University Press. Darby received a BA from Middlebury College and an MA from Columbia University. She has pursued extensive specialized training at the Yale Child Study Center, the NYU Silver School of Social Work, Mel Levine's All Kinds of Minds Institute, Harvard Medical School, and the Ackerman Institute for the Family. So please join me in welcoming her, and we're so excited for you to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And today I had a good time with your girls. They asked a variety of questions. And in fact, the youngest girls asked the hardest questions. So a great group. And I wanted to share with you tonight, I'll do it obviously a little differently, but what I spoke to your girls about today is some of the difficulties and challenges that we see from a neurological and psychological perspective in one of the first groups of children that have been developed during or grow during the age of technology. And there are some very real concerns, and you probably know about that as you hear of escalating mental health numbers through. It's been catastrophic, not only because of COVID, but I believe a lot has to do with technology and how we don't limit it. So tonight, my goal is not to criticize technology. It's amazing. It's done incredible things, but more to add some insight into what could be problematic, what we're seeing, and then how hopefully you might be able to parent accordingly to help mitigate some of those effects, because technology is not going away. So my entire talk will be based on sort of what is the neurology and the psychology that we combine to know how people are supposed to develop, especially young people. And then we look at what is happening or what might be changing, and we know what is a negative or a positive impact. So this first slide I love because it really tells us, it's one of the few things that we see. We always hear the brain is developing up close into age 24, but this is a great example, a picture with the colors of how the mind is developing. I think that all helps remind us how raw they are at young age, how malleable the brain is, and how much is yet to come. What's most important to keep in mind about that is if any organ or cell is developing, that unsettled structure is prone to any kind of impact that's coming in on it, whether it's chemicals or pressure, any kind of serious impact to a changing, developing cell will have an impact, for better or worse. So that's super important to keep in mind as we think about raising our children. And in this case, particularly the young girls that I saw today at Sacred Heart. So that if you approach the rest of this lecture from this mindset, I think it really helps. This chief predictor of adolescent, can we move myself off of here? Behavior is not the perception of risk, but the anticipation of reward. That is super important to remember as we go forward and we're raising the kids. That helps explain so much of what we see happening. Gratification is at the heart of adolescent impulsivity. It also starts, the brain starts to get wired for that as early as 5th grade, where kids are novelty seeking and they're getting ready to go into the high school years where socialization is at the forefront. Really critical to remember when your kids do something stupid or they break a rule and they didn't, you're like, what were you thinking? Chances are they really weren't thinking in the moment about that. They were thinking about something fun or engaging that might be coming down the road. And that leads their behavior. It's super important to keep that in mind. Sorry about that. As we go along this journey of developing our children, right now in the lower school and beyond, we're in this group of independents where they're always around parents. They're developing quickly into the place where we want them to be on their own. Identity is at the forefront. Who am I? What's important to me? How am I different from my peers? That's really the middle school age, like really what makes me work? What is this big world about? And then as we go into adolescence, it's more about relationships and figuring out how to develop relationships of all kinds. So these are the tasks that we would typically have seen. That first bad job, whether it's bussing tables or babysitting, not really getting paid, the paper route, all of those kind of things, the socializing, figuring out how to be on time, how to get to the bus on time so you don't miss it. All those pieces were really significant in the development of relationships. It's kind of gotten off track or hijacked lately with the huge dependence on technology, and that's screen usage and social media. And what comes up to us right away as the most concerning parts, all of these we'll touch on quickly, but the emotional state becomes impaired. The two biggest concerns are, first of all, what doesn't happen if we are starting with most of our development on a computer screen or through phones or iPads. We don't have the ability to read the cues that a normal person would have given us. So as you remember your little babies, those first times that they look at you, they acknowledge you, they smile back, that you can wave and they start to wave. All of those cues are how we're meant to develop what we call epistemic trust. That's the ability to sense when a situation is healthy or not healthy. Are these people we recognize? That's how we develop the notion of danger. I should be here, I shouldn't. All of that is done in a three-dimensional, very experiential way. And that's how we are meant to develop. What's happened now that we've gone so heavily to technology and screens of any sort is we notice when we're looking at things or watching things, it might recognize our face. Certainly the phone does, the computer, that's how we ID ourselves, but it can't respond. There's only two dimensions there, and we can't actually assess for ourselves what might be happening. We can't use all of our senses to assess that. That is really critical because without that ability to regulate cues, we have to be super vigilant. We have no way to know exactly how to hold things or people that are in that other world, cyberspace, accountable. And there's a real false connection. We don't actually know that we are part of that other world. We can't manipulate it. We can't really change it. We just know we want to be there, or it has something really gratifying or appealing for us. The next part that happens there is we're trying so hard to be part of that and connect, to be a part of things, which, as we in that last slide talked about, is the huge part of where we're going as we head into adolescence, is connecting and being a part of something bigger. What happens is, as you realize you're not connected, then you start to think, oh, how do I belong? I don't belong. Maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe I'm not pretty enough or skinny enough. There's something wrong with me, because all those people out there, that whole world is experiencing joy or interest. There's a lot going on and I can't be part of it. So I must be the problem. Once we start with that, we see social anxiety increase dramatically. We see depression. All of that comes in because, again, you're not part of it. There's no connection. That is one of the biggest risks of technology, is how it allows us to see ourselves and develop. The next piece with that becomes, this is something you're probably all too familiar with, is social media, the actual direct impact. Your kids are watching it nonstop. TikTok has just taken off. Everything you're watching on there or connecting with is, again, it looks fun. It looks amazing. People look good. It looks like something, some place you want to be, something you want to do, but you can't quite get there. So again, you start to think, how can I change this? It is worth mentioning, especially as your parents of young girls and women, all of these, Instagram, TikTok in particular, really impact the body image of these young women. And eating disorders have escalated about twofold since we've started really using Instagram and TikTok. Again, that tells us how much that disconnect is having an impact. Your kids can see it, they can feel it, they're certainly intelligent, but they don't know how to bring it into their lives. They try to change themselves, and that's super dangerous. The next part of this, which is super scary, is that in trying to find a solution, because they are novelty seeking and they're very creative in these young ages, is they're looking to see, how can I change this? What can I do? So they start posting. They're posting pictures of themselves in just about every imaginable way. The Instagrams, the selfies, all of that becomes heavily dependent on likes and impressions from other people, the response. Every time you get a positive response, we now know that it registers in your brain. The dopamine is released almost as a syringe into the reward system, and it registers almost as powerfully as something like a drug, like cocaine. Your body takes on that dopamine and says, oh my gosh, that was amazing, I need more. That's what draws your kids in, and that's what's hard to break the habit of. Your brain actually gets chemically rewired by the constant use of phones and screens, where you're always looking for a feedback. And then when you get it, it gives you enough of a bump in pleasure that you need more and more. And that's what keeps that very dangerous cycle going. The other sort of outcome we've seen from that is that when we're posting about ourselves, we're highly focused on ourselves. That means most of the information that you are taking in or putting on the screen is 80% about yourself. That will create a pretty narcissistic world, because all you're thinking about is how do I belong? What can I do? It's all about me, because I need more of this. I need more of this dopamine released in my body, because that's how I feel good. And you forget about all the other things that really we try and teach our kids that are most grounding. So I think that it's important we connect that with the other things that are also happening in the brain at this time. a young brain, I don't have to read this to you, but if you look where your children are on the bottom line here, like what area might they hit? They would all go from this child place forward into the teen section, where we know that the excitatory synapse, the neurotransmitters that create that go feeling in your body that tell you to pursue something, your body hits on those more than 2 to 1 over the inhibitory synapse, the piece that says, wait a sec, stop, think about this. Maybe you don't need this. Maybe you have other things you should do, or somewhere in the back of your mind, my parents said, don't do that. Your kids, and it's not an excuse for your kids, but it's super important information for not only your children, but for you as parents to know that if something, a force outside themselves is sort of saying, go for it, go for the most excitatory thing, you want to parent differently. You want to step back and think, okay, what's giving them this? They don't have the ability to necessarily stop themselves. I need to help them. I need to go ahead and be involved in all of these things that present as rewards, as self-gratifying as well. Again, this is just really more of the same from the last slide. This is the sensation-seeking piece. So again, all your girls are on a steep upward climb, looking for sensations that make them feel good. It starts to regulate as they get into college and beyond. But again, they're right in the heart of that. And that's what's driving so much of this behavior. This was something that the 5th grade girls really seem to love and want more understanding on. I wanted to talk about the different pieces of social media that really are a problem, or why parents might be saying, get off the computer or don't take that to bed. And LED lights are, the blue lights are, of course, one of the things that suppress melatonin and really do keep us awake. So when your kids say, I can't sleep, I'm going to just grab the screen, not a great idea, because it does keep the melatonin suppressed. So they're not going to feel tired. The same for me as I grab my phone most nights. But anyway, this is just a little bit more about melatonin. We hear so often about melatonin. It isn't something that is incredibly important to this piece of the screens, except that it is essential to have it released into our bodies. So anything that we can do for the young kids to keep it away so that they are getting the melatonin released at the correct time is super important, because it will impact their sleep in every way. And as we know, we find out every day there's a report on how much more critical sleep is to any part of our well-being. And I just want to reiterate here that adolescents, melatonin is released 2 hours later than it would be for you or I. So when we're getting sleepy around 9:30, they're getting sleepy at 11:30 or so. And that, again, is not something they can fight. Multitasking, another thing that we've taught with computer age. Everybody needs to be better at this. The more you can do it once, the more effective you'll be, the better off you are, more successful. It's a myth. Your brain is meant to work on one task at a time. That's when it's most efficient. That's when we take in the most or retain the most. If you see here, quickly, with just a little bit, the brain power goes down dramatically. This is critical for our kids that are in school, that are learning, that are headed to college, for them to see exactly how this worked. And it was interesting today, the 5th and 6th graders did kind of really want to analyze this, like exactly what does this mean? So if we're looking at this on the bottom, that's up to a minute. If you're trying to multitask, if you've got your phone next to you and you're studying, or the TV's on, or someone's talking to you, the music is on, and you're trying to read or you're trying to write a paper, whatever's coming in, your brain can retain fairly well for 20 seconds. That's scary. By the time we hit about 20 seconds, the brain's ability to hold on to it, process it, make sense of it, and spit it back out drops to almost half. So that means you're going to have to do, for every minute, it's almost double to retain the same amount of information. Again, critical to know when we're trying to raise these kids in very high pressured, very heavily scheduled world that's heavily dependent on multitasking. Because I guarantee you pretty much anytime we've got a screen on, there's another screen somewhere nearby. So again, just important to keep in mind. So then you ask me, okay, this is great and kind of scary, but what do we do about it? How can we be involved? So in a very simple way, we want you to check your checking. That means, I know you said, oh, I checked in on her, she doesn't have any screens on. I want you to go back in the bedroom and remind them, or I want you to go as far as taking the phones, putting them in the kitchen for short 30 to 40 minute sessions where no one's got a device and everybody's actually doing some task at night if that's homework. Or whatever it may be, I want you to set limits. Somehow you have to limit it. That not only helps with the multitasking and those pieces, it helps your kids stay away from that disconnection into the cyber world, where they automatically are getting frazzled because lots of things are going on. They're usually overloaded because it's by the end of the day. And they also are seeing stuff that's bringing the message into them. You're not quite here. You're not quite good enough. You're not quite connected. Really important for our mental health of any of our children that we have the ability to shut off for them because they don't really themselves and put it away for certain periods of time. We really want to disconnect. However that works for your family, there needs to be time to disconnect before you reconnect. Can't iterate how strong that is enough. So then the next piece that we really talked about today is how does all of this impact your friendships? And again, as you all know, that's critical right now, no matter what age they're at. There seems to be lots of drama. There's times when everybody's left out or doesn't feel good about something they heard someone said behind their back. It's very complicated. So what I urge them to do, and this is where I would love for you to help as well, is help remind them when things start to get really complicated with their friend group. Pull back for a minute and say, okay, wait, this person keeps coming up and they're constantly creating problems for you. Let's think about where might they fit on this spectrum. Are they really in the close friend or the best friend? We hear lots of labeling from kids these days, especially because of text and Snapchat. She's my bestie, whatever it is, my BFF, all of that. We hear a lot of the best, but frequently that range and there on out is a lot of problematic behavior. There's a lot of posturing back and forth. And if we can help our kids figure out who lies where. And as we get further out in this circle, anywhere past this one that has the 15 in it, you really aren't their acquaintances. They might be people you know or people in your community, but they aren't necessarily your friends. Really important that we stop teaching our kids that if someone likes you or follows you on social media, they are not your friends. I'm not going to go into the dangers of that from a perspective of people pursuing you or online things. I think people know a lot about that, so hopefully they do. I am purposely skipping that because I feel like there's some other areas that maybe you don't think about as much. So again, what do we do here? Given all of the drama that I've discussed that's created for your kids about the online world, I want you to think about going to this network of relationships that we have in the community. And what we've studied a lot about is in order to build more resilient kids, the way to build more resilient kids is to connect them to a community. You can endure so much more. And having just gone through COVID, we know this. If you feel you've got a connection outside of just your immediate family or your very close friends in the inner part of that circle, if you've got someone who's got your back or cares about you, notices when you're sad or you might be dysregulated, and you can go to other people, you know other people are your champions, then we start to see mental illness problems, social anxiety, depression, even suicide rates diminish because people feel connected. That is one of the biggest things we've missed in going to a technological world. We don't have to rely on our communities, our neighbors, our parents. We have been able to isolate those people. And by and large, that has created a lot of mental health issues because we're alone with just our family or the network we've created online. And that's really tricky. So I urge really to help your kids with that. And your kids will know too who they kind of like, the best teacher, the best coach. It'll be because of something beyond what they teach in the classroom. And I want you to really encourage your children to build a network of relationships. And then this is what I discussed with your kids at the end. I said, if you take away anything from today, there's something, these are the two things I really want you to take away. First of all, if it's not face-to-face, it doesn't count. I would like you as parents to know that we said this to your kids and they were really able to embrace that and kind of work with it. But also, I want you to try and use it too, because we have to remember that no matter what we say, what our kids follow is how we act. Our behavior is what all of these kids, even the teenager, the 17-year-old, the 16-year-old, we think doesn't pay attention or listen. They notice how we conduct ourselves. So this piece of if not face-to-face doesn't count is critical to remember. And as parents, that means I would love for you to not argue with your children over text, to only do the basics and send a cute picture here or there, minimal directions. Make your interaction with your child live, real world, experiential, three-dimensional. If you're disciplining them, so much more important. If they have to look at you and you say, look, I'm kind of disappointed. You've broken curfew for 3 nights in a row. They can feel your disappointment. Then they have ability to react or respond to that. We will go a lot farther. And number 2 is, I just think this is a great rule of thumb to always follow. And one, I would imagine probably an 8th grader, after I told the kids this in the middle school group this today, asked me, could I say that I've ever asked myself those questions? Have I ever conducted myself that way? And I said, that is a fair question, but I absolutely have. And at many times I've started to text someone back, or I've been angry with a friend or even a kid. And I've thought, you know what, I could just lay into them on this phone, or I could say something mean or post a not so attractive picture. And I've learned to really pull away from that drama, that it doesn't do anybody any good. And this is a great way to hold myself accountable. And I think as adults, we need to do this. And then we need to teach our kids to be accountable for what they say and how they act. Very simple. Before I do something, is it really true? Or am I kind of fabricating it? Is it nice? And is it necessary? Does it really add to the situation? Those are the things that I'm asking the kids to be better at, to pull away, be more grounded, and take more accountability for a real live interaction. And if we have the ability to do that, then we see a lot less impact of depression and anxiety coming from being constantly connected to technology. So other than a few breathing techniques and some simple things like that, that's really what I went over with your kids today. And I think they asked amazing questions. I think they had some great takeaways. And I want to end here and allow you all time to go ahead and ask me some questions.
So we just feel free, we just put some messages in the chat. Please feel free to submit your questions as we go. Darby, I just want to thank you. That was so wonderful. And I have to say, I love your message of connection. I think it's so timely as we're sort of mid-COVID. I don't know if we're post-COVID, but to just hear that message of connection and how important that really is really wonderful. So we'll start with what looks like a two-part question. And can you spend some more time explaining disconnect before reconnect? What does that look like? That's part one. And comfort with discomfort seems to be a theme here. We know it's a life skill, but how can we do a better job of sticking to this? There's just a lot of fatigue when it comes to holding the line.
Great questions. So the first one is, again, and that's just to kind of, for visual pieces, keep it kind of short and sweet, but disconnect before you reconnect is to help acknowledge that computers are here to stay. All the communication that's done on computers and phones, all of that is not going away. So there was a time a few years ago where we said, just don't give your kids phones or don't do that. I still hope that you don't give your kids phones at young ages, because it creates all of this angst and this certainly negative feedback. So I really hope you wait until they are in their teen years. But given that, and the fact that it's ever present, I want you to actually notice when your kids are struggling, they're exhausted, they're about to break to tears, or they're nasty, they're cranky, they're mean. Notice that's a time when they need a break, whether they know it or not. And instead of saying, okay, I'm going to take your phone away from you because you're being rude, if you can say to them, hey, something seems off here. Why don't we set the phone down and take the dogs for a walk? Why don't we just take a few minutes and check out this magazine? Why don't we go to town and grab some food or grab a coffee? To help your kids realize when what's coming in is creating a lot of anxiety or frustration, and they're constantly going back and forth, like with friends or whatever, it is important for you to just simply say, hey, we need to take a pause. We need to build in some time. So that disconnect is really shut the computer off. Take your phone and move it aside. Don't check your phone for a few minutes. What does that look like at night? I really encourage everybody to shut down communication at a certain time of night. I cannot tell you how scary it is that in my private practice, kids from age 11 to 14, I don't worry so much in the later years if they're able to manage their life, but we have kids with huge issues that are seeing a therapist because there's some issue, and they're between 11 and 14 years old, and they are on their phone or on the internet at all hours of the night. 1 a.m., 2 a.m. A girl came in this week. She's just turning 12. She said she was exhausted. She'd been up all night on a group chat. One of her friends is in India. She's never met him. Those are really scary things that happen. And as parents, I do hold you accountable for that. It's for you to know who's on the screen when or who's on the internet. And the best way to do it is just shut it down at a certain time. So that kind of leads a little bit into your second part of the question. And I think we all are tired. We just went through a pretty rough period with COVID, a lot of uncertainty. But it isn't that hard to stick to your values, especially if you state them up front. And I really want to encourage you. That's one reason I like if it's not face to face, it doesn't count. I want you to actually have those conversations with your kids, because as they become teenagers, all you have is your relationship. It's very hard, especially with kids that may be bigger, whether they're girls or boys, or there gets to be an age where you really can't just take a phone from them or take the toys like you would a little toddler. You have to actually have a conversation with them. So you need to say, look, in our family, it's not okay for you to, I don't know, see your boyfriend and not have him come in here. You're going out with someone, you need to actually bring them in to meet your family at a certain stage. Or if you miss curfew, I actually am not going to let you go out this weekend. And it doesn't mean I don't love you. I love you to death, but I have to hold you accountable to this rule. Now let's figure something else out and not stay stuck on that really punitive piece, especially with anger in your voice. If you can regulate yourself in holding tough to your whatever those rules may be, and just reiterate, again, this is actually what we're going to do. And it isn't about me loving you or not loving you, trusting you or not trusting you. It's just what I feel is what's right. I really want you to hold that. And it isn't that hard. If they argue, if they mad, I hear lots of parents saying, my kids are sad and so much was taken from them. That's okay. You're setting them up for what's about to come. They don't get to tell a boss, I'm kind of tired. I'm not going to stay late and redo that PowerPoint, or I'm not going to run extra sprints on the lacrosse field. So it's really important that you start to get them used to that now. Again, this is what you have to do because this is just life. And it doesn't have to do with me not loving you. Really important. Does that help?
I think it helps a lot.
Okay.
Along the lines of that question as well, we were wondering, how do you know when a child is ready for access to social media? Is it by age? What's your thought on that?
Great question. It's both. It's how does your child interact with other kids? Do they easily become undone? Again, social media, I would put up in, and I would do it very gradually, and I wouldn't do it before age 12, 13. If they can't keep track of their shoes or their sweatshirt, they don't need to be on social media. I mean, it really makes no sense. So I think you look at that and then you judge. I had one child who would have been very ready for it. And in fact, didn't really even care about it because she had other things going on. But then you've got one who's so eager to get into it and feels like they're always being left out or that they need more. That's where you want to monitor it a little more. Kids that seem to need that instant gratification, that impulsivity, those are the ones I would hold back on because they don't have that ability to monitor themselves. And we've seen that the science that I gave you tonight should help encourage you to know their brain's hardwired to go for the fun, the more intrusive, the less monitored things. And it's really important that then you as parents say, you're not quite ready for this. You're too impulsive. You don't say that to your child, but you say you're not quite ready.
Right. So you have to know your child, and there isn't one particular.
Yeah, there's not one set age, but I really wouldn't do social media until they're at least 12.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. This is a really interesting question, Darby. What about peer pressure? Will screen limits work if they are the only ones doing it in their peer group? You certainly hear this a lot, this question a lot from parents, particularly kids entering middle school, where there's such a broad range of who has technology and to what extent. So will screen limits work if they're the only ones with limits in their peer group?
Yes, they will work if you approach it again by saying, okay, we aren't doing this to punish you, but we don't believe it's really healthy for you to be in constant contact with these kids, especially when a lot of stuff happens that seems to make you unhappy. So our family rule is this: we limit it. You can't have it past 8 o'clock, or Sunday through Thursday in younger families. We don't go on our screens. You don't get your iPad during the week during those times. You can have your computer for schoolwork. Really important that you talk to them about it. So part of my goal today was hopefully to give them some of the science behind it, because once we know that, then we're less likely to think it's just our parents being mean to us. Your kids can handle the peer pressure if you talk to them that way. And you also, anybody should make sure, if you have chosen to give your kids social media, you want to make sure that you say to them, now, everybody in class doesn't have it. All your friends don't. Who doesn't? Ask the question. They'll tell you, so-and-so doesn't have a phone and so-and-so is not allowed to do that. Then as a parent, you make sure when there is a party or a gathering or everybody's going to a movie, you ask them to ask these kids if they've been included. Has anybody reached out to them? And you monitor that. Parents have to be involved in those things.
Thank you, Darby. Yes, I think that's wonderful advice. Switching gears a little bit, we have a question that I think is super important. Asking, how much do you think kids are hiding from their parents in terms of high-risk behaviors? Is it prevalent and parents are just oblivious, or is it not so much there?
It's prevalent. It's pretty prevalent, and it happens so much quicker than you think it does. So again, the best way to get ahead of that as a parent is don't be the parent that says, not my kid. Because frequently, then you're the one that has that lack of awareness, and your kid is the one sneaking the White Claws or the vape pen or that kind of stuff. What you want to be able to show your kids, and this is a little bit of a tricky line, is you're aware of things like that. And you're aware that there's exceeding pressure starting in middle school and going into high school. But you say, this is what I think about it. This is what I want you to do. This is the choices I hope you make. I know it's not always easy. I know it's not always going to be clear, but this is what I want you to know. If you do that in advance, really important for all of these adolescents that are jumping, as you remember, right to the gratification. You can't unlearn what your parents told you. You can't unlearn what someone's impression or feeling is about something. So when you go to make that risky decision, you've at least got something in you that sort of said, my parents are going to be mad, or I shouldn't be doing this. It's a little bit more of a stop. And that's really important in predicting how they'll behave. Please be aware stuff happens fast, and it isn't bad kids. They're hardwired to be looking for fun, risky things. It makes them accepted. Sending naked pictures happens so early, it's scary. All of that stuff is much sooner than you think. So just please be aware of it and discuss it with your kids. What happens if you take that naked picture and you think it's only going to 2 people? That can never happen. So I just think that awareness and your acknowledge that stuff happens really helps your kids make better decisions.
Thanks, Darby. This is a question about some of our middle schoolers. How mindful can a middle schooler be? Is this mostly a learned behavior or skill?
How mindful, as in, if we're taking the word mindful as in the kind of trendy word, like we want you to be mindful of this, or we want you to take a minute and meditate and be really mindful. That's a great question, because that's pretty hard to conceptually come across if you're a middle schooler, because you're actually right in the stage where you're going from very concrete learning to being more inferential. So what that means is basically in 5th grade, you're basically retelling the plot to the story, but by 8th grade, you can add some insight and add some dimension to it. So being mindful in middle school, I would make sure that I taught these kids that what actually that means is take a minute. If you're mindful about something, take a minute and think about it. You can pause for just a second at any time and think, what should I do here? Or what does this look like? How do I feel? Do I feel okay? That's mindful. So I think it comes in a middle schooler. You've got to give it to them where they are in a way that they can take it in.
That sounds wonderful. Also along the lines today, some of the girls were really curious about friendships, and they asked some really fantastic questions. And I just want to reiterate a few of them right now. The girls were really curious to know more about what it means to be in a toxic relationship, a toxic friendship. They wanted to know, what does that look like? How do we operationalize that so that we can understand what it means? And if we are in one, what do we do about it?
So those were such great questions that they asked. And again, even in 8th grade, as wise as they are, they're not asking those questions if they aren't experiencing it. So there's some reason that's not something that just pops into your head. So with that in mind, it's really important to know, I described that a toxic friend is someone who's always asking for things from you, but is very seldom giving you anything or checking on you. They're the one that can quickly dismiss you. They will have plans with you, and then they suddenly disappear. And then you see them an hour later on Snapchat with a group of girls, and you didn't get the invite. So you know you got dumped. That's what it looks like to be in a toxic relationship, where someone is taking advantage of you or just taking and not giving back. Another girl asked, amazing, how do I know if I'm toxic? Am I the toxic one? How do I know? Great question. That's where you need to say, wait a sec. I don't really like this person, but they're great at showing up for me when I really need a shoulder to cry on. So I'm going to go to them. I don't really care about going to parties with them or doing anything fun with them, but they're a pretty good shoulder to cry on when I'm really down. So I'm just going to go to, if you're doing that, if you're the one that drops people suddenly, if you're always asking for something from someone, but never giving it back, you are the toxic one. I would love for you guys to talk to these things about kids and use examples. They asked me again if I'd ever used number 2 here on the screen, and I gave them an example. So important that you can talk to them about, yes, I have this toxic friend, and I had to learn that it was up to me to say, no, actually, this doesn't feel good. I'm going to step away. I can still have you as a friend, but I'm not going to let you come quite so close that it hurts. Those are the kind of things that are the hard conversations that you guys need to be having with your children that make a huge difference when it comes to risky behavior.
Also the modeling at home, I think, in terms of helping the kids see the way that we manage situations with our friends, and trying to be open-minded and talking to our kids, depending on the age, of course, regarding circumstances that might make sense, and bring it to real life and help them communicate with us about what's going on in their world and their friendships.
Exactly. And they do hear you if you're on the phone and you're cutting down one of the neighbors or someone they know that you frequently socialize with. They take all that in, and then they think, yeah, my mom does it, or my dad said that, why can't I? So we want to be pretty mindful of that word.
My kids hear me right now giving a webinar on social media. They're listening very closely.
So I think we have time for just one more question.
Okay.
And As parents, we want to monitor screen time and what they do on screens, but this is hard to do without always looking over their shoulders. Of course, nobody wants to be doing that. Apple and Verizon systems are limited. Do you know if there is anything better?
You know what? There are other companies that have monitoring devices that you can put on there, and I can get a list of those to the school that they could send out and share. They're always changing quickly, so I don't want to send out the names right now. There are. One thing I always said to my kids is, I'm not going to be all over you and checking, but if I ever want to see your phone, or if I ever want you to pull up your history on the computer, you better know, you better do it as quickly as I ask. And you better not, there should be nothing on here that you have to explain. And I think just the notion that I said, look, I'm going to let you have a little bit of leeway here. Of course, when they were older, from 14, 15 on, but I made it clear to them that I would monitor at any point that I felt there was something I needed to do. Did help them think about what they were going to do before they did it.
Thank you so much, Darby. This was a wonderful, wonderful discussion, and so wide-ranging. So we so appreciate your expertise and your knowledge and all of the wonderful insights you shared with the girls. It was really just incredible today. So we thank you again for joining us this evening, and thank you to all of the parents out there. Though we can't see you, we so appreciate your participation and your questions, and we look forward to connecting all again soon.
Yes, and if anybody wants, the school knows how to reach me, darbyfox.com. I've got a website. The book you can get on Amazon or Oxford University Press. And hopefully it's meant to be kind of that manual that I modeled it after, sort of the what you need to know when you're expecting, so that it is something, when something comes up, you have something to go to and kind of look and think, okay, where does this fall for me? How appropriate is it, as kind of a manual? So I hopefully that's a useful resource as well. Thank you for spending your night.
Thank you, Darby.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.